Neverness to Everness has been an absolute roller coaster of a game. When first announced, people were stoked. An urban fantasy open world exploration title to compete in a new way against titles like Genshin Impact and Wuthering Waves, but with a more modern twist. Initially touted as the Gacha GTA, people were stoked. It's developed by Hata Studios, the company behind Tower of Fantasy, and while the game fell off, they still have a proven track record of support for the game and a fairly loyal base. People were excited to give NTE a shot, but when the beta happened, players found it was actually really missing a lot. The graphics were mid, the open world driving felt bare bones, and in a market where people were already burned out on Genshin combat, it felt like more of the same, with a lot of people feeling disappointed. And, to make matters worse, Project Mugen, now rebranded as Anata, started dropping their own drip marketing as another open-world urban fantasy, but even included some Insomniac-style web-slinging from Spider-Man and a new punchy-looking combat. This forced NTE again to play their hand and to drop some more reveals, only for it to fall on deaf ears. But now, things are a little bit different. NTE is about to go into its next closed beta test, and somehow I think they've managed to flip the script, and they actually have a chance to win back the hearts of players. Let's talk about why that is. I'll be the first to admit that when I saw the new Neverness to Everness trailer, I was not impressed. I have been burned way too many times by game companies showing some flashy animated cinematic, getting really excited about it, only to find out that the game itself actually sucks. And I'll be honest, I thought Neverness to Everness was doing the exact same thing. And I said in my reaction that still exists on the video on my channel that they needed to show more. And I gotta be honest, they did just that. Recently, they dropped a developer live stream. It's about 45 minutes long, where they went over all of the new details and changes that they made for the game, and it's got me looking at Neverness to Everness a little bit differently now. In the 45-minute video, the developers showcased a lot of improvements to the game, from complete redesigns and graphical overhauls to gameplay optimizations, and I think it's turning into something more special that players can get behind. Graphics have improved immensely. What went from a more generic anime style has now turned more detailed and dynamic, with way more depth added to it. The light rendering, the reflections on the water, the overall environmental details look great. Assuming it's optimized well and the average machine can run this in a similar format, I think it's a huge step in the right direction. I think games like Wuthering Waves, which has continued to add graphical updates to its game post-launch, continues to push the quality that players expect from these open or pseudo-open world gachas. NTE's new environmental and weather effects are really good, and I like the ability to customize the seasons and the weather. Does this make any sense to be able to control that? No, but I think from a gameplay perspective that's way more fun, and it's a really neat feature that allows you to play the game how you want to. And to be honest, I was impressed with the snow effects. As a Canadian who's experienced many winters in my life, I thought the overall scene looked great. The only thing missing was all the sand and the salt caked on your car windshield, so even after wiping it away with your windshield wipers, you still can't see in front of you, but I digress. New shops and stores throughout the city, more NPCs moving around, interactive public transit you can actually use really help with it not feeling empty. All with this doubling the map size from the previous test too. That's a huge step. From a technical standpoint, it also looks like they're doing their best to optimize this for multiple platforms, and even do a showcase on a mobile phone directly. They max the graphics settings, weather effects, and start driving, and it runs fairly well. There is definitely some popping that still takes place, but given that this is a beta state of the game, it seems like it's come a long way. And I think it was genius for them to include that clip on the phone directly. They mentioned that mobile testing on the global side is limited because of device compatibility, so including that in their live stream to kind of show people where it's at, I think was a great idea. Look, I can go on and on about the improvements, but let's summarize it with this. The cityscapes look great, the environment looks awesome, and the character animations are a great improvement, and all of this was definitely needed. Looking at some of the characters for a second, I love the giant witch hat on Marula because obviously the bigger the hat, the more powerful the witch. I also love the Shrine Maiden Hotori, and I think of all the improvements, I think it really comes together with Hotori specifically. They showcase her combat, and overall, I think it looks great from an animation standpoint, and she feels very reminiscent of Raiden Shogun. But the kicker is she can activate this time stop mechanic that also infects the improved weather system, suspending the droplets in the air. And I gotta be honest, that was a sick level of detail that left me very impressed. When you look closely, you can see how the skill actually spawns the weather effects and they animate out, and then the normal weather system resumes, but it just because I can spot how it activates doesn't make it any less cool. While all of these technical improvements are nice and were definitely pieces that were needed for the game, it doesn't directly address a lot of the other concerns that exist. A lot of the big appeal for this game is a lot of the driving and the almost pseudo GTA-like experience that you get with the game. While I know this is the major area of concern, I also think it's their major area of strength and can make them stand out way more than the competition. I grew up loving the Need for Speed titles like Need for Speed Underground 1 and 2, and some of the new night driving feels very familiar with those titles, which I love. In the driving showcase, they added 6 more cars, a scooter, and a motorcycle, which seems like a solid start for a beta, but I really hope to see the overall roster expand. Also, including a first-person driving mode, I think brings something for the F1 fans out there who would love to drive around like that. Look, I'm a third-person guy myself, but I do think it's a nice and thoughtful addition to the game. The game has improved the overall handling and even added variants with different weather conditions to help with immersion. But on top of that, NTE is adding one thing I think previously mentioned it needed, with new multiplayer racing modes. Adding some of those casual modes like this is what is going to make the game special. And where not everything needs to be tied to some kind of progression system for rewards, but you can just go back to because it's fun. So many games today, and then gacha games in particular, really treat co-op and multiplayer as an afterthought. They kind of have their core gameplay of what they want it to be, realize players want to do multiplayer a little bit, and then just kind of tack it on there, not really thinking about what the full experience would be like. So I'm glad to see that they're already considering these pieces. I think the open world and multiplayer driving will be the game's biggest appeal, for sure. And really trying to emulate the GTA Online experience, I think is key and would really help this game go to the next level. With the addition of new casual PvP modes and lobby creation with friends, I think this is going to offer something that no other gacha game really has at this stage. Maybe more will come from competitors like Anata, but that remains to be seen. And I think as a result, gives them first adopters advantage. To add to the GTA-like experience, the game also includes shop customization and operation, and you can also own multiple properties in the game, and it has been up to 5 for this test. These include garages for different vehicles you can have in the game that can be customized. Now, I want anybody who's excited at the prospect of a gacha GTA to understand something, that they're never going to go full GTA. And I think that's for 2 major reasons. One, restricting the age rating limits the reach of player base, and China won't go for that level of real-world violence in a game. Even now, you can't actually harm civilians, even with the inclusion of a wanted system. There's too much of an emphasis placed by the CCP to make sure that people are always acting like upstanding citizens, so it would be harder for them to push farther than this for more open-world violence. Look, I don't need to go to a strip club and to shoot hookers in this game to have a lot of fun with it. But I do think they should lean more towards the GTA Online experience with implementing, different like heists or events or activities you can complete together as a team, as opposed to just being tacked on there as a co-op player. I think overall, the open world exploration with the driving included is going in the right direction. And as long as they continue to add more cars to the game, I think will be a major selling point for this game. However, the other major selling point is the characters and the combat. So let's talk about that. Earlier, I mentioned that one of the major pieces of player feedback is that combat wasn't great and it felt too similar to something like Genshin Impact. Well, Hada addressed a lot of the concerns directly, and I gotta say, in today's market of developers, it feels really refreshing that they did. The team directly acknowledged that combat was one of the major points of feedback and failure in the previous technical test, and a whole host of improvements from optimizations, animations, and adding new features entirely like a critical dodge counter and parry attacks were all added and not in the previous version. I'm not gonna lie, it was a pretty extensive list of improvements that had me feeling pretty impressed, like they were taking the feedback seriously, but it's really not quite enough to just see it in the video. I think when it comes to combat improvements, it's very much you gotta get your hands on it and really see it or play it to believe it. I think games like Wuthering Waves have really been pushing the envelope in terms of what players should be expecting from these games and the combat that's being provided. They want something a little more in depth and something a little more technical. I'm not saying we need Tekken and we need some kind of a hyper technical Street Fighter, but I think they want something more in depth than just a color matching system. And I think if they can strike a balance between the two, I think NTE is going to be a lot bigger than originally thought. However, there's one other elephant in the room that we need to address, the maker and breaker of gacha games, and that is the gacha system. Does NTE actually have a player-friendly gacha system? Well, I think they kind of nailed it. Look, at the end of the day, a gacha is a gacha, but I think their system's pretty effective. The gacha system seems unique with a board game format that is different from the Hoyoverse or Kuro Games titles like Wuthering Waves. You roll the die to move a set number of spaces, and if you land on the character tile, it has a chance to be an S rank. Soft pity is 70, with character tiles and S rank drop rates being increased after that. But the best part overall No 50-50. This is why I love seeing competition come into the market, because this now makes 3 recent gacha games all not having 50-50. Etheria Restart dropped its 50-50, Duet Night Abyss announced that it's not having a 50-50, and now NTE does not have a 50-50. I really hope we see this trend continue with other titles, because I hate the 50-50 system and it's always been the bane of my existence. And so I love that this is something that's changing in the market, and I hope we continue to see these gacha mechanics get more and more player friendly. I understand a game's got to monetize in some way at the end of the day, and so in this case, at least make it as player friendly as possible. They also mentioned that arcs, the weapon system of the game, are available in this gacha as filler, but not to worry, as most A ranks and even S rank weapons can be earned in-game through gameplay, making it even more free-to-play friendly. Overall, it seems like a solid system, and assuming the general free-to-play rate of currency allows you to save reasonably, I think this is going to be one of the stronger systems in the market. Look, a whole host of technical improvements, animation improvements, and apparently combat improvements, so many things that are coming to this game that, I'm going to be honest, has me leaving impressed. NTE was a game that I originally thought was going to be completely dead on arrival and honestly didn't have a chance, but the recent information has got me feeling a little bit differently about it now. Now look, at the end of the day, the beta starts on July 3rd, and that's when we're going to know for sure if the improvements are actually going to have the effect that we're hoping for. Is the driving going to feel really good? Do the new cars feel really good? Are all the improvements to the combat going to make it feel different enough from Genshin Impact that people aren't still feeling that same level of burnout from that other game? We'll have to kind of wait and see. And once we get our hands on the new beta, we can actually express that a little bit more. We'll definitely talk about that and see if NTE really has a chance to be something bigger coming into the space. But for now, what do you guys think about that? Do you think NTE actually has a chance to bring something new, to actually get as big as maybe some of these other titles like Wuthering Waves or Genshin? I mean, I feel like getting as big as Genshin is like still kind of unlikely because of a whole myriad of reasons, you know, first adopters advantage, you know, COVID, a lot of other stuff that came along with it. But, you know, Wuthering Waves has been making some major waves in the space and has really been catching up. So, you know, maybe another one has a chance to do that too. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.